So hi, welcome to my talk. Excuse my voice, I got a little cold overnight, so I hope it's working well. So this talk is about part 2 of refactoring of the ItemSet stuff. I started this because it was in a bad shape, and for motivation, you need to know ItemSets are a very central component of LibreOffice. They are basically just a key value mechanism, so it doesn't sound really complicated. So key is just an integer rich ID, and value depends on the derivation of the pool item. So currently we have around 430 different item types derivated, and they're used everywhere in the office, mostly in the model to hold fractions of object data, but also for UI using rich IDs, which is the same, using slot IDs, which is the same like a rich ID, just above 5,000. So just internal definitions from older times. It's also used for load save, and there's an adaptation to use it in the UNO API as any's to easily access existing item sets and values in them. And so it is very central and key for speed, memory, and stability. Not only, but one of the central things we have, which is influencing that. So when I started it, with part 1, it was in a pretty bad state. Very early I made a try to make it type dependent. So, but this was just a test. It worked. You can see it in Garrett somewhere, but I canceled it because it doesn't help, because all the implementations in the code are using the current API to this item, so it makes no sense to make just a better implementation, completely safe and type-based, because you cannot rewrite the office, and that's pretty much what you would have to do with a new set of item set implementations which use another API. So the next one, the next try, which was now successful, was to step-by-step improve what we have. So at the beginning, we had memory losses, speed issues, a lot of manipulations, where people were bending stuff to make their life easier. We are all humans, so there were lots of hacks. You know, this FFF value for pointers, stuff like that was used. So it had always to be tested when accessing an item, because, of course, it did not point to an item, so Office crashes immediately when something is, when flags like that are used. So I replaced stuff like that. So also ref counting was abused, and there was something like a SFX void item with different rich IDs to flag stuff, which is also not a good idea in the long term, and different mechanisms for item accesses. And one of the worst things, which still happens a little bit, but I could clear most cases, is that the ref counted items were modified, and that's very bad, because you have data that is ref counted, for example, by 4 or 5 places, used by 4 or 5 places, and someone uses constcast, which is too easy in C++, unfortunately. You never know what gets changed, so it's a game of luck. So also the static defaults were not really static, but constructed and destructed every time item pool was created and stuff like that. So the first part of the cleanups, you can see one of my older talks. It was something like 2 years ago or so, but you will find it. So now I continue to drive this forward thanks to Collabora and Michael Meeks sponsoring it. It's always hard to get sponsoring for stuff which does not change something and bring a new shiny UI, but improves internal stuff and speed. it's hard to sell stuff like that. So now we go into the newer changes for the second set of changes I did in the first half of this year. So in Git you can just grab for item a column which I like to use with commits so that it's easy to grab and gives a group of stuff which fits together. So there are something like 33 commits. And if you are interested in technical details, you can check the code comments and commit comments. I always try to make them readable and reflecting information that should not get lost. So one of the things was to create more numbers and statistics to know what's going on, to better know what's going on, and to better decide what could be changed. So there's a lot of new statistics in the items, only in debug code, of course. And you see an example, just loading a medium-sized calc file and close the item again. And you can see two things. There are 0 items left over, so we have no memory leaks anymore. And you can see the vast amount of items used just loading a single file. So you get an impression how intense the items are used. And if you are working with the Office for a few minutes, you get into the millions. They get constructed and destructed all the time. So every second counts with the item stuff. So also included infos about the non-shared items to better understand which item types would be worth sharing more and to invest more time. And also included fill rates of ItemSet, very important. How much percentage relative to the which IDs an ItemSet is holding is really used. And this was very important for some decisions. So the basic changes are where are the items? They are now all indeed in the ItemSet, what everyone would expect from the first point, but this was not the case before. They were all held in the pools, not in the ItemSet, and the pool was owning the items. This had some reasons, and in the past it was very important to share all those items, but the sharing with existing items is now not immediately as it was before, but starts with a threshold value. And this brings the speed improvement I was hoping for, because the cost is in finding an already existing item which you want to share. So this is where a good speed up comes from, and accidentally this was brought back, the old behavior was brought back by a wrong change for a while, and this immediately doubled the loading times again. So I never, because the process was step by step, I never really knew how much improvement it brought, but this gave a good hint that it was all worth it. So what does the item pool do now? Before, in the old stuff, it was really holding the items, but now it's more or less something like an extension to the model for writer calc or draw impress for the document model itself. It was used like that anyways, but now it's more specific and does no longer have this extra task to hold the items. So now single list of items and those properties is used to separate once before, so made it error prone, complicated, which ID just to identify, Interesting is that which ID is currently a member in the items itself. I think that's an error because the association between the item and a which ID comes when you put an item in the item set using a which ID. It should not be part of the item itself, but we have so much code using it and 430 items, so it's not really changeable currently. It would be a lot of work. Was a question? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Try it like that. So, item pool is also doing the mapping of slot IDs to which IDs. I talk a little bit more about that later with the remaining problems section. And it offers Boolean flex. So instead of having single members, it's now easier to add more flex if we have some more stuff to do with items. So as I said, item pool is more a part of a model. So the model could also be derived from an item pool nowadays. So default items, as I said, the static default items were not really static before, so they were just constructed and destructed with every incarnation of an item pool. I could change that after some previous changes. Now, really 95% of the items are indeed static from the static default, and they really can use a standard array in Office start. So it was still necessary to have 3 types of default items. As I said, the static defaults, most cases, but there are some cases left where I needed something which I call dynamic defaults, and there are simple reasons for it. For example, the SFX set item, which is an item which itself includes an item set. So you have a deadlock because this needs the pool for which you are just about to define the default item. Not possible. So it has to be constructed at first access to this default item, and then the pool is available, and it has to be constructed and held and owned by every pool using SFX set items. So this is not a good item type to use, but it exists and we cannot get rid of it easily. So I had to support it somehow. And there are the user defaults. These are really unproblematic. They can just be expressed as normal items. They can be shared globally. They can continue to exist when the pool goes down. So no problem with those. And some models use them intensively to modify the defaults. So the last big change I did, and I was not sure if that will work, was to really change the content of the item set itself to an unordered set, to get rid of the fixed array of null pointers which was used before. And you can see the which ranges. If you're not familiar with it, every item set had to be, or has to be, or currently still gets constructed with a which range, which defines valid ranges of which IDs for this item set which it can hold. But the only reason was to have a limited size to be able to create that array. And with the change to unordered set, we don't need that anymore. So before I did that, if you remember, I showed you the statistics of the item set usages and how much they were filled. So this made it possible because they were rarely filled. It was something like 20–30% fill rate of the most item sets. And so I did the change and checked the results, and the speed of item sets is pretty much the same, because unordered set access is pretty much the same, like the needed tricky access with the which pair ranges. And memory usage is even less because of the not so much used fill rates. Even if the unordered set initially constructed is, of course, a little bit bigger than nothing, or just a few items. So, interestingly, this caused no real regressions. This was the biggest surprise for me, because I thought this step will explode the office. And by the way, for every change I did with the item sets, I did not even dare to put it on Garrett before not at least the unit tests for Writer, Calc, and Draw Impress were running locally. So it's so picky, and every change is so delicate. You have to be extremely careful with that. So big advantage is we do not need the width ranges anymore. So no width ranges anymore. That would be really good, but currently all item sets need to be constructed using them, except we have one type, all item set. It's about 10% of the item set usages, and it's mostly used in places where people did not want to define a width range, which is very understandable because it makes it really difficult to use item sets at all. But even that internally still uses width ranges because it's too dangerous to change everything in one step. It's still updating it, so if you set an item on an all item set, the width ranges get expanded by one, which means to construct a new width range set, which is expensive, and it can traditionally not hold slot IDs. That's even an assertion when you try to set one. So this type of item set could never be used for UI stuff. So this has potential for future optimizations, because all item set would be ideal to make the first test to get rid of the width IDs completely. So there's also SFX item set fixed. This was an interesting C++, how should I call it, experiment, because it did something very interesting with this old technique of the null pointers. It derivated this null pointer array into the class to have it in the same memory spectrum like the item set. So this made the item set use just one memory lane in the caches. So very interesting technique, but no longer needed. So currently it's just a wrapper and a constructor with the unordered map. It's no longer needed. But it's hard to clean up. There's a make fixed item set constructor in item set to replace it. I replaced it in one or two places, but it would just be typing and reformatting work to get rid of it. And the problem is the code is so huge. It would be an easy hack, but yeah, it's not really necessary to do, but it should be cleaned up one day. So can we stop to use width ranges? Yeah, theoretically yes, but again, because of the huge code base, it would be a lot of work. Another argument against this, there are places where item sets get filtered by item sets. I knew at least in writers there are some places. So someone defines an item set exactly with the width ranges he wants to filter and puts another item set into that to get it filtered. So the constructors then just takes over the items which were defined in the width range. This could, of course, be replaced by adding just a filter function. The problem is these places would have to be identified to not risk to change the behavior of the office. And there's also an iterator using the which IDs, but I checked some places where it's used, and I'm pretty sure it could be replaced completely, because when you think about it, it makes no sense to iterate just over which IDs, but in the end, even if two item sets are involved and you want to balance them somehow, or they get compared to create something new, if there's no item set at some place or some which ID, it makes no sense to do anything. So it's the only thing which can happen is that you get a default set somehow, but you can do that without switch IDs. Would be possible. So the item set implementation itself internally also uses the which ranges, but this could in most places also be replaced. So the benefits would be code complexity would be hugely reduced, and a very, very important point from my point of view is the entry hurdle for people who are working on LibreOffice code would be immensely lowered, because I don't know what you thought when you saw an item set the first time and what the which ranges are doing, but I think most people are annoyed and don't know what to do in the beginning. Why do I have to define which ranges? What is it good for? So, there are still existing problems. All problems solved? No. Many, but unfortunately, some really nasty ones are still existing. So let's have a look. I'm not sure how much time we have, and this is very technical now. And one of the craziest things we have is the mapping of slot IDs to which IDs. So it's hard to understand, but we have the same item in different usages. For example, a font item in Writer and Edit Engine. But in Writer, when you have a stack of pools, both could be used at the same time with different which IDs, of course. And you want to have code or places that should process that item independent of the which ID to not have to double the code. So the solution which was chosen was mapping using the pool from slot ID to a which ID and to write the code using the slot ID. So the problem is this mapping is done dependent of which pool you put into this method doing the work. So it's the most indirect and error-prone way to decide which mapping will happen. So, and of course, no documentation at all. You have to guess or grab a few days and read the code to understand what's happening. So when you put another pool in the same method, it will behave different. It's really shocking and very hard to clean up. And I have no good idea how to get rid of that one. And we have something called the surrogate mechanism. This is really a pretty hard thing also to remove, and every usage of it is a hack from my point of view. And it's doing nothing else than iterating over all existing items of one type in one pool. So it was a shortcut, or is a shortcut, to not have to iterate over the model yourself. And the problem is, it is used to read maybe in 2/3 of the cases, but in 1/3 of the cases, it's even used to write items and to change them. So this is very problematic because this item, a shared item, does not have to be model data at all. It's just guessed that it's model data. It can be from an open dialogue or from whatever is happening, which also is using an item set in the current model and in the current pool. So really, really dangerous. I don't know how many problems in the background are coming from that. And I slightly dismantled it by no longer directly changing the items, but adding something like iterate item surrogates, which offers you to be called for all item sets where this item type is set. And the only clean way to change an item in an item set is to read it, clone and change it, and set it again. And this is offered by this method, but not all places in the Office are changed to do that, and there are still calls to the surrogate mechanism, which does constcast and changes items. And it's hard to prevent people from adding more places using that shit. And we have non-shareable items, also bad stuff. The item is just not non-shareable because one of the principles of the item is to keep isolated data. And if you have data in your item, which is, for example, referencing something back with a pointer, of course you cannot share that item because that pointer has to be different in every incarnation of that item. And so it breaks one of the basic principles of items. Very hard to remove. There are items of that kind all in writer. What a coincidence. And this should be removed, and that an item does hold pointers or specific data for referencing a model or whatever is a clear hint that using an item in this place is the wrong method. So all these places should be fixed. So and then we have chain pools. I try to remove that because we have the preconditions to get rid of chain pools, and the dream would be to just compose a pool. You start with an empty pool and you say, I want writer model possibilities, I want drawing layer possibilities and edit engine possibilities. Merge this into my new pool and use it. But this is not possible because of this already mentioned slot ID mapping. So I found no way yet to make it, to remove that. I once tried it, but immediately led to errors. So we have to come up with something to solve that, but I'm not sure yet. So there are still to-dos. Clean up as if item set fixed. Easy, but amount of work. Remove which IDs. Hard, but now possible. The which ranges. It could be removed. Solve mapping of slot IDs. That's hard. And remove the surrogate hacks. That should be doable because every place where that happens is more or less avoiding to iterate the needed model data yourself. So it's just a shortcut, which unfortunately was offered in the code, and I even can remember who introduced that some 20 years ago. I will say the name, but I told him at that time, it's a nice hack, but we will pay for it. And we pay today. So, also the non-shareable item problem, but that's it. So there's still much to do, but it's already in a much better shape than before. As I said, no memory leaks anymore. Speed is pretty good. Sharing is pretty good. we had to balance it a little bit with the sharing, because there were one or two cases coming up where the sharing had to be changed to get the performance like before, because of course you have some break even from not sharing the items, and the memory usage and different memory addresses when you start sharing them. So this break even could be detected with the statistics, and so the office is now pretty well behaving with that stuff. So still much to do, but worth it from my point of view. So I hope you have an overview. One of the most delicate parts of the office, pretty much cleaned up, but not all. So that's it. Questions?
How long did it take? How many months?
Well, I have to guess, but altogether, part 1 and part 2, 4 or 5 months. And that's just because I know the backgrounds of that stuff.
It's still your questions. I'm just connecting everything.
You can answer more questions while he's setting up, if you want.
More questions?
Also for such ones?
Yeah, as I said, items are also used in the UI, but it's just using the key value mechanism of items in a very rough way. But they are also holding item sets, and they also profit from these optimizations. But it's very specific in the UI stuff. Yeah, used everywhere. Yeah. More questions? Okay, thank you.